China's Great Wall was built to halt Mongol invaders. Hadrian's Wall contained northern tribes. The walls of Jerusalem, Constantinople, and every city in history stood to defend against enemies at the gate. Yet, in 1961, Berlin erected a wall unlike any other, the Berlin Wall. For the first time in history, a wall was not about keeping enemies out, but about locking its own people in, a prison that changed history. Why would a government barricade a city from within? What drove the USSR and East Germany to seal Berlin overnight, fully and irrevocably transforming it into an open-air prison? Why did that wall have to exist, and what was it truly defending? After the Berlin Airlift, tensions in Europe soared. Germany was carved up among the four victorious powers: the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union. Even Berlin, though within the Soviet zone, was split into four sectors. In 1949, two German states emerged: the Federal Republic of Germany, supported by NATO and the Marshall Plan, and the German Democratic Republic, allied with the USSR. It was the start of the Cold War. Berlin became the conflict symbol. In the West, a city reborn. In the East, a socialist regime. With the Iron Curtain drawn, rivalry between superpowers ignited across Europe.
Did you know that most people who watch our documentaries aren't subscribed yet? If you enjoy animated maps and history, join our community. Leave a like and subscribe so you never miss the next episodes.
Meanwhile, the Cold War had ceased to be an ideological duel. In 1950, the Korean War erupted, the first true proxy conflict between East and West. On one side stood the Communist North, backed by the USSR and China, which dispatched nearly 1 million volunteers. On the other, the South, supported by the United Nations and led by the United States, mobilizing over 1.7 million troops. 21 UN countries took part, turning the Korean Peninsula into a battleground and a symbol of each bloc's resolve. In Berlin, fear of another global war spread swiftly. Thousands of East German citizens began fleeing westward. Between 1950 and 1953, more than 500,000 people crossed Berlin to reach the Federal Republic of Germany. No walls, no impenetrable blockade. Crossing an administrative boundary, using fake documents, or simply boarding a train to West Berlin was enough. The socialist government lost workers, technicians, doctors, teachers, and especially ambitious youth. Official propaganda labeled them traitors, yet the flow did not slow. Soon, East German leaders would conclude that only far more drastic measures could halt it. This exodus revealed the GDR's vulnerability, undermining its credibility at home and abroad. In 1952, to stem the flow westward, the German Democratic Republic decided to seal its entire land border with the Federal Republic of Germany, over 800 miles from the Baltic coast near Lübeck down to the Hof area. Barbed wire, barriers, and armed watchtowers staffed by the Grenztruppen were erected. Anyone trying to cross through forests, fields, or rural stretches of Lower Saxony, Saxony-Anhalt, and Thuringia risked landmines, patrols, and gunfire. Yet Berlin remained an exception. The boundary between East and West was still formal, with few checkpoints, open roads, and an easily traversable frontier. Precisely that anomaly turned Berlin into the leading escape route for Eastern citizens. While the rest of the Iron Curtain became ever more impregnable, the city's urban border stayed porous. Each day, thousands freely crossed both sectors. From the regime's viewpoint, Berlin was becoming a dangerous gateway to freedom, one that needed to be shut as soon as possible. Its open streets stood out as a loophole amid an otherwise fortified frontier, prompting urgent action. In May 1955, the Soviet Union founded the Warsaw Pact, a military alliance that included East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and Albania. This bloc directly challenged Western NATO, formalizing Europe's military split into two armed spheres set for confrontation. The GDR's entry bolstered the Soviet presence in the region and reinforced Moscow's sway over East Germany's armed forces and internal policy. In October 1956, Hungary rose up against its communist regime, seeking liberation from Soviet authority. Soviet tanks rolled into Budapest, crushing the revolt by force. Over 2,500 people were killed, and thousands of Hungarians fled westward. That massacre revealed to the entire Eastern Bloc how far the USSR would go to defend its system, no matter the cost. In East Berlin, the GDR leadership vividly recalled the June 17, 1953 uprising. Thousands of workers had protested rising production quotas and the regime's harsh conditions. The protests began at Stalin Alley work sites, but spread citywide within hours. Not only workers, but ordinary citizens, wary of restrictions and propaganda, took to the streets. The Soviet response was swift and brutal. Tanks rolled in, dozens were killed, and thousands arrested. That crackdown left a deep scar, proving to East Berliners that dissent carried a dire price. Fear now loomed across East Berlin, where memories of violent suppression stifled dissent, underscoring the extent of Soviet resolve to maintain control in the GDR, whatever the consequences. In October 1957, a technological breakthrough shook the West. The USSR launched Sputnik, the world's first artificial satellite, igniting what Americans would dub the Sputnik shock. Suddenly, Moscow's ability to send an object into orbit signaled the capacity to build long-range missiles capable of striking anywhere in the Western Bloc. It was a jarring psychological blow, demonstrating a Soviet technological edge amid the Cold War. In 1958, buoyed by this momentary advantage, Nikita Khrushchev raised the stakes with an ultimatum. He demanded that the United States, France, and the United Kingdom withdraw from West Berlin, calling it a foreign body in socialist territory. Yet the West stood firm. To yield would have meant abandoning its defensive role at Europe's core. Military and diplomatic presence in West Berlin remained steadfast, and tensions soared, making the city one of the Cold War's most incendiary flashpoints. This standoff underscored the high stakes involved, with Berlin emerging yet again as the epicenter of a global confrontation. As the USSR kept expanding its reach, a new factor pushed tensions sky high. In 1959, Fidel Castro seized power in Cuba, bringing communism just a few miles from U.S. shores. Soon after, in 1960, the Soviets managed to shoot down an American U-2 spy plane near Sverdlovsk in the Urals, thus revealing the United States had been running high-altitude surveillance missions inside the communist bloc. Capturing the pilot dealt a blow to Western credibility, further fueling mistrust between the two superpowers. Meanwhile, in East Berlin, the exodus showed no sign of abating. In 1960 alone, over 200,000 people crossed the city's border into West Berlin. Among them, doctors, engineers, teachers, and other skilled workers. This mass departure undercut East Germany's economy and exposed its ideological frailty, while propaganda tried to hide the issue or brand defectors as traitors. This surge laid bare the emptiness behind socialist promises, prompting East German authorities to tighten border measures while publicly downplaying the crisis, and no official explanation sufficed. Complicating matters, Berlin felt almost surreal. Though technically in Eastern territory, West Berlin still maintained ties with the West, and even some transport routes that ran beneath areas under Eastern control. Rumor had it that, in those months, certain residents used ghost trains or seldom guarded paths to dodge checkpoints and reunite with family and friends. This showed how difficult it was for the regime to seal the flow entirely, which would grow until the problem became completely unmanageable. In April 1961, the United States backed an attempted landing by Cuban exiles at the Bay of Pigs in a desperate effort to topple Fidel Castro and end the newly established communist government in Cuba. The operation collapsed disastrously, triggering a sharp escalation in tensions between Washington and Moscow. In June of that year, U.S. President John F. Kennedy met Nikita Khrushchev in Vienna. Their face-to-face was laden with mistrust and yielded no compromise. Kennedy reiterated that the United States would never abandon Berlin, seen as a bastion of freedom in a Europe fractured by the Cold War. Meanwhile, NATO increased its contingents in West Germany. During those years, Kennedy strengthened America's bond with West Berlin's population, culminating in his famous June 1963 visit when he proclaimed the iconic phrase, "Ich bin ein Berliner," I am a Berliner, to underscore the West's solidarity with the divided city. Yet by 1961, the GDR leadership, under the USSR's hardline guidance, was planning a drastic solution to stem the outflow of fleeing citizens, the total closure of West Berlin, which would become one of the most dramatic chapters in Germany's history, the Berlin Wall. On the night of August 12 through 13, 1961, everything changed forever. GDR soldiers, police, and workers encircled West Berlin with barbed wire, blocking roads and rail lines. In under 48 hours, the city was abruptly sealed off, with dozens of miles of barriers slicing through neighborhoods and families. The evening before, many Berliners had gone to sleep oblivious. By morning, phones and transport links were cut. Entire districts literally split in two. The psychological impact was enormous. In a single day, a once unified city became two separate worlds. Those temporary fences soon gave way to a concrete wall that, upon completion, stretched over 96 miles, studded with more than 300 guard towers and a death strip up to 100 meters wide in places, equipped with trenches, fences, and firing positions. In the following years, more than 5,000 people attempted to flee, yet at least 140 lost their lives in the desperate dash for freedom. It was the most tangible symbol of a global order built on division and fear. The Berlin Wall remained in place for 28 years, dividing not just the city, but the entire world between East and West. From the night of August 13, 1961, until its demise on November 9, 1989, it claimed at least 140 lives among those who tried scaling it. As the starkest symbol of the Cold War, it finally fell under the Berliners' own push on November 9, 1989. If you enjoyed this Cold War narrative, please subscribe, leave a like, and share it with fellow history lovers. Thank you for watching.